Today on Hearts of Heroes, a massive hurricane swallows the southeastern Louisiana coast.
It was a Category 4 storm by the time it made landfall.
We're talking 150-mile-an-hour winds for hours.
Becoming the second most damaging hurricane in the state's history.
One of our halls looked like a bomb had blown up in it.
Warnings went out, but some of the most vulnerable were unable to evacuate. That's when unexpected heroes stepped up.
It was heart-wrenching. How are we going to get all of these people to a safe place?
After a storm of this magnitude, it's up to dedicated friends, neighbors, and first responders to try and pick up the pieces. We often speak of first responders as being true heroes, which of course they are, but many times there are unsung heroes who come to the rescue in times of need.
Like when Hurricane Ida threatened the lives of a neonatal unit and a senior living home, it was the nurses, staff, and even maintenance workers who stepped into that heroic role.
Ida was a quickly developing, fast-moving storm.
When these storms approach so quick, there's not enough time to call a formal evacuation.
It was a Category 4 storm by the time it made landfall.
The wind is howling, the rain is coming through. It's a panic mode, it's survival mode.
Once the storm is hitting, you are 100% on your own.
Yeah, that's scary.
Travel 13 miles west of New Orleans, and you'll find yourself in the city of Kenner, Louisiana. Founded in 1855, this region was once acres of swampland.
Kenner is generally below sea level. You have the river to the south side of the city. You have Lake Maurepas to the northwest. You have Lake Pontchartrain connected to that. So this entire region is surrounded by some sort of water.
Because Kenner is only 60 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, it's a prime target for hurricanes. The most notable, Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
Hurricane Katrina was a Category 5 storm that flooded New Orleans and the surrounding areas, causing billions of dollars in damages.
Hurricane Katrina was the city of Kenner's last big hit.
In August of 2021, the city of Kenner began bracing for another major storm, Hurricane Ida.
This storm was so fast-moving that we didn't have an opportunity to call for a mandatory evacuation.
It's an enormous undertaking to evacuate the metro area. And if you don't have 72 hours to do it, it's not going to happen. And we didn't have 72 hours.
That required a lot of people to shelter in place, especially the elderly, the assisted living facilities, and those types of facilities.
Westminster Tower is one such facility.
Westminster Tower is 62 and older, so it is a senior building, and it has 282 units.
There are residents that have nowhere to go, and their only option would be to ride the storm out. By the time the storm came, we probably had 130 still in the building.
Just 13 miles down the road, the staff of Ochsner Baptist Hospital's 54-bed neonatal intensive care unit was bracing for the incoming storm.
A NICU is a special care nursery for babies who need special care as far as like some respiratory distress or congenital anomalies. They're not ready to just go home and stay with mom and dad.
But for these fragile patients, evacuation wasn't an option.
We're dealing with people's most precious things in life, and regardless of what the weather's like outside, we take care of what we need to for our patients and for each other.
It was a Category 4 storm by the time it made landfall.
Coming up, the people of Kenner endure one of the strongest hurricanes in the state's history.
We're talking 150-mile-an-hour winds for hours.
And with rescuers unable to respond, they had to brace for Ida's fury.
It's a panic mode, it's survival mode. That's what you go into.
But first, this tip to help keep you safe in a hurricane.
During a hurricane, items that typically appear harmless, like lawn chairs and trash cans, can become dangerous objects.
Items like these can easily be swept up and thrown about by strong winds. If you have time to prepare, be sure to move any loose items from your yard into an enclosed space like a garage or a shed.
Taking these few extra steps to prepare before a storm hits can help keep you, your loved ones, and your home safe until the storm passes.
In August of 2021, Hurricane Ida, a Category 4 storm, was headed straight for the Louisiana coastline.
The storm was moving in too fast to call for a safe mandatory evacuation. The only option for many people was to hunker down and shelter in place.
With a storm this powerful, it is not safe for anyone, including first responders, to be outside.
Once the storm is hitting, you are 100% on your own.
As the storm approached, the team of nurses at the Ochsner Baptist Hospital's neonatal intensive care unit were preparing for what could be a very long ordeal.
It's just a lot of unknown and a lot of anxiety leading up to what are we actually going into.
Ready to face the unknown, this team began emergency prep.
We pull all the babies away from the windows in case the windows break. We close the hurricane shutters, we close the curtains, and we move them closer to the doors.
We've got generator power here, so we're making sure that everything is plugged into that generator.
Meanwhile, at Westminster Tower, much of the staff left to protect their own families, and only half of the residents had places to go. So, maintenance technician Michael Ventry stayed behind with those that didn't have an option.
The reason why I didn't want to leave, because I know I have some residents that cannot move flexible like everyone else. And if I stay here, I can help a lot of them get their medications, get them back up and down the stairs.
Late Sunday night, on the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, Ida hit with incredible fury.
We're talking 150-mile-an-hour winds for hours.
Once it truly hit us, I knew we were gonna have a long ride because it just lingered over us.
It was very terrifying. Water poured in everywhere in the lobby. A window was blown out.
Once the wind broke the windows, the whole hallway, all the shingles and stuff went to blowing all over the place. Residents really went to panicking.
The Tower 1 elevator looked like a waterfall because part of the housing on the roof broke off.
Then the power went out.
It was boom, like that. It was 1 minute the lights were on, the next minute they were off.
Upstairs, Joya Henderson, who is visually impaired, realized that her apartment was filling with water. She called a neighbor for help.
I said, Joe, come up, I need your help. I have water in my apartment.
So I ran up the stairs to the 5th floor. She had water coming in under her air conditioner.
Joelle needed to get Joya out of her flooding apartment, but with no power, the elevators weren't working.
My true fright was going down the stairs, having to go 5 flights down, because with all of the water coming through the shafts and stuff, we weren't able to use the elevators.
But once downstairs, Joya found out that things weren't much better.
To see the devastation downstairs with the water and the broken glass, and it just took your breath away.
Hurricane Ida was not only powerful, it was relentless.
She sat on us and wouldn't move. And this went on for about 11 hours. And I didn't know if this thing was ever gonna end. And that was a long, long night. It was a long night.
With the winds howling, nurses and staff at the Ochsner Baptist Neonatal Unit were doing everything they could to keep their at-risk babies safe.
It was scary, seeing all the rain hitting the windows, hearing the thunder, hearing the lightning, and you're still seeing the windows vibrating, and you're looking at the outside world, which is pitch black because all of the power's gone out.
Coming up, Kenner withstands the seemingly unending wrath of Hurricane Ida.
You're watching the wind blow trees down, blow utility lines down.
One of our halls looked like a bomb had blown up in it.
And nurses at Ochsner Baptist Hospital prepare for the uncertain future.
What's going to happen next? And you're just waiting and waiting and waiting.
The city of Kenner, Louisiana, was taking a massive beating by Hurricane Ida. The storm hovered over the area for hours and hours.
I'll never forget it. I was right there as that storm was ripping apart buildings and leaving 1 million people without water and power. It really felt like an endless disaster.
It's really frightening. You're watching the wind blow trees down, blow utility lines down.
You're watching the wind blow. You're seeing the power lines swaying in the anticipation of what's going to happen next. And you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and then it blows over.
After almost 12 hours, Ida finally passed. But with the power out in most of the city, the Ochsner Baptist Hospital team had to remain sheltered in place.
So essentially, no one is able to leave and no one is able to come in.
It was 4 days. So to have to work 4 days in a row, back to back to back, and not having really any breaks in between because you're still at the hospital.
Those days are stressful, knowing that the storm is done, but you don't know how your house is. How is everyone else's house?
Fortunately, the hospital had generators and clean water. Meanwhile, the Westminster Towers were realizing the extent of their damage.
We lost power, we lost water, the elevators weren't working. When you don't have water, then you lose drinking water, you lose plumbing facilities. It's a real nightmare.
Maintenance technician Michael Ventry was doing all he could to keep the residents safe.
Once the power went out, it was real difficult. At one time, I was feeling like, okay, it's just you, Mike.
He had been up for over 24 hours, and even after being up for more than 24 hours, he wouldn't stop.
Soon, after it was safe to venture out, the remainder of the staff came back.
Trees were down. One of our halls looked like a bomb had blown up in it. I mean, wires were hanging from the ceiling, the glass was everywhere.
We had water coming down from the ceilings in the offices and in the hallways. I mean, just flowing down the walls. It took my breath. You just have a moment of, where do I start? Where do I start?
To make matters worse, the temperature was rising, and without electricity, there was no air conditioning.
It's Louisiana. We're already 100% humidity, so it was miserable. It was miserable.
It was so hot, literally the sweat was dripping off your face, and you just felt like you were going to collapse. It was immediate knowledge that we would have to do a full evacuation. It was heart-wrenching because you're thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to get all of these people to a safe place?
Coming up, the staff of Westminster have to find some way to get their folks out to a habitable space.
I did not know what I was going to do.
But first, a tip to help keep you safe.
Being caught in a natural disaster of any kind can be stressful.
As first responders, we're trained not to panic. If you find yourself in the middle of an emergency, even though you may feel overwhelmed, staying calm can be extremely beneficial.
So remember, listen to the first responders. They're trained to keep you focused and composed as they direct you to safety.
The residents of Westminster Towers survived a harrowing storm that left their building without water, power, or air conditioning. The towers were wrecked, so much so that more than 100 remaining residents just could not stay there.
The Department of Health and Hospitals are calling me and telling me, are you getting those people out? I'm like, I'm working on it, I'm working on it. You're trying to find shelters. So I'm calling all of my managers, and luckily my manager in Lake Charles found us a shelter.
But the shelter was hours away, and there was no way to get all these people over there. After dozens of calls, she came up empty.
I remember getting home very, very late. I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And, sorry. And I told my brother-in-law, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I gotta get these people out of the building. And my brother-in-law, who drives the school bus, he said it jokingly, oh, Tricia, we'll just put them on the school bus and get them out of there.
Tricia took him up on his offer, and the staff scrambled to evacuate everyone from the shredded building and prepare them for a really long ride.
I had to make sure they had a cold cup of water when they left. They had snacks. Miss Tricia and all of us got together, fixed sandwiches.
Eventually, the buses arrived, and it was chaos.
Getting people who are on walkers and canes and in wheelchairs up school bus steps was a real challenge.
I physically carried a couple of them. It was hard. It was, you know, with my arthritis and stuff, but I didn't feel it at the time.
He wouldn't stop. He didn't leave until the last person was on the bus, and he helped put those last few people on the bus to evacuate. That's when he thought about himself, and not until then.
After a long 7-hour journey, the residents of Westminster made it to the shelter.
I actually lived in the shelter with them for the first week, so that was a great comfort to them in this huge shelter with hundreds and hundreds of people.
When I saw her, I just felt such a sense of relief because I knew everybody would be taken care of and everything was gonna be okay.
That smiling face came through the door and it just perked us back up and we knew we were gonna be all right.
With everybody out safely, our sponsor, Belfour Property Restoration, began the painstaking task of making these towers livable again.
Nearly every surface in almost every unit was affected. Air conditioning, electrical, HVAC, plumbing, elevators, floors, you name it, it was damaged. So we began boarding up broken windows, cleaning up broken glass, securing the roof, securing all the exterior of the building, and then stabilizing. We had 75 to 100 people working. We had an 18-wheeler fully stocked. We had trucks coming in daily with materials to get the project done. Our job is to return a structure to a pre-loss condition as quickly as possible. So just getting people back to normal, that's the first step after a major loss.
Meanwhile, after the 5 days of lockdown, the team at Ochsner Baptist Hospital were finally allowed to return to their homes.
There was relief, but also fear, because for a lot of us, when we were leaving, it was the first time we'd actually gotten to glimpse our city after everything that happened. You're going from, I'm protecting these babies and taking care of these babies, to now I need to assess my own personal situation and get started.
And then getting home and getting to see my kids, hug them, was the best. So, but that's when it hit on how tired I was.
Over the next few months, the city of Kenner was on the road to recovery. Only 7 weeks after Westminster was deemed uninhabitable, thanks to the efforts of Belfour, residents were able to return home.
They were clapping, they were jumping for joy. They were so happy to get home.
Heaven on earth. And when you came in here, it was even prettier than it was when I left. I'm truly grateful that I found this home.
Everybody needs a soft space to be able to know they can go back to, and this is their home, and this is their soft space.
Between the Westminster Towers and the Ochsner Baptist Hospital, there were plenty of heroes to go around.
Whether it's a healthcare worker or staff in an apartment complex like that, they made the decision to stay. Heroes have to focus on their job, their mission, to save the people and to help people who are in distress.
These are some of the true heroes in disasters and storms of this nature because they sacrifice the comfort of being with their families to care for those critical patients.
I did what I do, and if I had to do it again, I will. If you're responsible for someone, don't abandon the ship.
Hurricane Ida cost a lot, around $75 billion in damages. But despite all that loss and devastation, it did what so many other storms do, brought people closer together.
Proving again that a hero is sometimes that person standing right next to you. We'll see you next time on Hearts of Heroes.